Shalom, YouTube. Shabbat Shalom. I forgot to include one little part. So, we're going to be discussing the synagogue of Satan, which I consider to be Canaanites pretending to be Hebrews. Revelation 2:9. I know your works and tribulation and poverty, but you are rich. I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. So, Jesus says that the Jews, the real Jews, are good, but there are false Jews, blasphemers, pretending to be Jews, who are the synagogue of Satan. These are the ones who are antinomians. They are heretical to the Torah. They might dress Jewish, they might talk Jewish, they might sound Jewish, but in the end, they do not want people to follow the Torah. Not completely. They definitely don't want people to follow the prophets, and they definitely don't want people to read the Gospels. Revelation 3:9. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before your feet and to know that I have loved you. Jesus loves us. And he's going to make the synagogue of Satan fall before our feet and grovel. Let's get into the Canaanites. One final piece. Now, Canaanism was a cultural ideological movement founded in 1939 that reached its peak in 1940s among the Jews of Mandatory Palestine. So before the nation of Israel was established, there was a group of Jews calling themselves Canaanites. Amazing. Amazing that they could do this without being killed. I'm just saying, Moses received very clear instructions. You will cleanse Israel of all the Canaanites. Well, they didn't have any fear of that, did they? So, who do I think was responsible for the Holocaust? It was a bunch of pagans, including some of these Canaanites who wanted to kill the Torah-observant Jews who were a threat to their ideology. Because you can see this in the 1600s with Jacob Frank in Poland. Jacob Frank is calling himself the Messiah. He's calling himself the reincarnation of Zebedee Zevi. And he says, essentially, transgress all the Torah, and that is how you're going to get the Messianic kingdom. Break all the laws of the Torah, and everything is going to be fun. And a lot of the Jews were like, these Satanist heretics need to be taken care of. And they went to the church and they went to the government. They're like, these people are making Judaism look horrible. They're not really Jews. They're heretics. And they were like pleading with the government, do something about them. So the real Jews have been opposing the synagogue of Satan imperfectly, but opposing them for some time. What would be a better move than Louis de Rothschild in his Austrian prison speaking to Heinrich Himmler multiple times as Himmler visited him in prison, telling him the plan for World War II, telling him, we are going to exterminate the Jews, we're going to exterminate the Christians next, and we will create a pagan country that looks like Israel but does not follow the Torah. We are close to the finish line. And Himmler just went along with it. Himmler was so racist to the Jews, and yet here he is hanging out in prison with a Rothschild. Louis de Rothschild was visited multiple times in prison by Heinrich Himmler, and Himmler gave him a nicer bed and a better area to live in while they negotiated the ransom. I mean, it's insane. What is this pagan occultist who says he hates Jews so much he won't even let you into the SS if you're 1/8 Jew? What's he doing here with Jewish aristocrats who were known for black magic, who were known for all this evil stuff going back to the Napoleonic Wars? Canaanites. So Canaanism was a cultural and ideological movement founded in 1939 that reached its peak in 1940s among the Jews of Mandatory Palestine. It had had a significant effect on the course of Israeli art, literature, and spiritual and political thought. Its adherents were called Canaanites. The movement's original name was the Council for the Coalition of Hebrew Youth, or less formally, the Young Hebrews. Canaanism was originally a pejorative term. It grew out of revisionist Zionism and had roots in European extreme right-wing movements, particularly Italian fascism. Most of its members were part of the Irgun or Lehi, which I assume are political movements. So here's a statue of Nimrod by Yitzhak Danziger, a visual emblem of the Canaanite idea. But we know Nimrod was a wicked man. We know he was a horrible, wicked man. And in some of the Apocrypha, it says he tried to kill Abraham. In some of the Apocrypha in the book of Jasher, and some of the Talmudic stories, and some of the stories in the Quran, it says he tried to throw Abraham into a furnace. Well, Graven images are a great sin, and here they're making a graven image of a very wicked man. Cananism never had more than around 24 registered members, but because most of these were influential intellectuals and artists, the movement had an influence far beyond its size. Its members believed that much of the Middle East had been a Hebrew-speaking civilization in antiquity. Yes, the Semitic languages, they spoke a very similar language to Hebrew. Kuzar also says they hope to revive this civilization. They hope to revive the Canaanite civilization, creating a Hebrew nation disconnected from the Jewish past, which would embrace the Middle East's Arab population as well. So they wanted to create a Jewish nation that would mix with the Muslim religious groups perfectly. Because Arab and Muslim are practically the same thing. You're not going to go to an Arab country that's not 80-90% Muslim. Which would embrace the Middle East Arab population as well and disconnect from the Jewish past. They saw both world Jewry and world Islam as backward and medieval. Ron Kuzar writes that the movement exhibited an interesting blend of militarism and power politics toward the Arabs as an organized community on the one hand and a welcoming acceptance of them as individuals to be redeemed from medieval darkness on the other. So, the movement was founded in 1939. In 1943, the Jewish Palestinian poet Yonatan Ratosh published an epistle to the Hebrew youth, the first manifesto of the Canaanites. In this tract, Ratosh called upon Hebrew youth to disaffiliate themselves from Judaism, so abandon the Torah, and declared that no meaningful bond united Hebrew youth residing in Palestine and Judaism. So he's saying reject the Torah, reject the Gospels, reject all that stuff. Ratosh argued that Judaism was not a nation but a religion, and as such it was universal, without territorial claims. One could be Jewish anywhere. For a nation to genuinely arise in Palestine, he maintained, the youth must uncouple from Judaism and form a Hebrew nation with its own unique identity. The term Hebrew had been associated with the Zionist aspiration to create a strong, self-confident new Jew since the late 19th century. The birthplace and geographical coordinates of this nation is the Fertile Crescent. So he's talking about separating from Judaism, separating from the Torah. Out of their estrangement from Judaism, the Canaanites were also estranged from Zionism. The state of Israel ought to be, they argued, a Hebrew state, not a solution to the Jewish question. Following the first Aliyah, a generation arose in Palestine that spoke Hebrew as a native language and did not always identify with Judaism. Designating the Israeli people as a Jewish people, the Canaanites argued was misleading. If it was possible to be a Jew anywhere, then the state of Israel was merely an anecdote in the history of Judaism. A nation must be rooted in a territory and a language, things which Judaism in its very nature could not provide. Territory, the kingdom of Israel. Language, Hebrew. Read the Old Testament. So in 1944, Yonatan Ratosh, one of the movement's leaders in the 40s and 50s, published the opening message at the committee session with the Messengers of the Cells, a 50-page pamphlet containing the founding speech of the Hebrew Youth's movement. On the cover of the publication is pasted the image of the proposed flag for the Hebrew people. The golden symbol on the flag is based on the first Hebrew letter Aleph in the Paleo-Hebrew script, which symbolizes the horns of the bull. Are they saying they're Baal worshippers? The golden symbol also symbolizes the rays of the sun worshippers. Oh, that's nice. At sunrise, over the mountains in the east in blue, which paint the sky red. This symbol was later used by the movement, and following it, the movement's newspaper, also called Aleph, Ratosh attached great importance to this flag, which he called the flag of Techelet, the blue, light blue. Let's see what else we find. So, the movement promoted the idea that the land of Israel was that of ancient Canaan. This is true. Or according to others, the whole of the Fertile Crescent, to which ancient peoples and cultures had lived, and that the historical occasion of the reemergence of an Israeli people constituted a veritable revival of these selfsame ancient Hebrews and their civilization. No, the Canaanites were not Hebrews. If you read the Old Testament, you can see what they are. They are a wicked people. They are Moloch worshippers, sacrificing their children to Baal, and God told the Hebrews explicitly to exterminate the Canaanites. So, revival of these selfsame ancient Hebrews, ancient Canaanites, and their civilization, and consequently a rejection of religious Judaism in favor of a native and rooted Hebrew identity. So there you go. Reject Judaism, embrace the Canaanite paganism. Because the Canaanites sought to create in Israel a new people, they mandated the disassociation of Israelis from Judaism and the history of Judaism. So don't just reject the Bible, reject the history books of Judaism. In their stead, they placed the culture and history of the ancient Near East, which they considered the true historical reference. They argue that the people of the land of Israel in the days of the biblical monarchs had not been Jewish but Hebrew, and had shared a cultural context with other peoples of the region. Yes, the Jews were constantly disobeying God, and they were mixing in with the pagans, and it was always causing problems. So we're seeing that with this movement of aristocratic intellectual elites. Citing contemporary biblical criticism, the Canaanites argue that the Tanakh, the Torah, reflected this ancient history, but only partly, since it had been compiled in the period of the Second Temple by Jewish scribes who had rewritten the history of the region to suit their worldview. And that is actually what the official story of the historians says. They believe that the Torah was written around the year 500 before Christ. That is horrible. The Torah was written by Moses, okay? The Old Testament is a very ancient text. Moses is around 1500 before Christ. This is before they took the land of Canaan around the year 1400. This is before the kings, the judges, all that stuff. Here they're and this is so that's how you know how influential they are. The Canaanite revisionists, their version of history is what the history books teach. They teach that the Torah was written around the year 500 before Christ. So they're saying it's corrupted, essentially. They're saying the Torah is corrupted. That's absolute heresy. Much of the Canaanite effort was dedicated to researching the history of the Middle East and its people. The Canaanites cited approvingly the work of Umberto Cassuto, who translated Ugaritic poetry into Hebrew. The Ugarites, I know that's a pagan society. I don't remember exactly where they are, but I do remember that name. The Ugaritic gods are pagan gods, very similar to the Babylonian gods. Ugarit was an ancient city. There it is. It's Syria. So these would be considered like, these are probably Amalekites. I know there's Amalekites in the land of Syria. Canaanites cited approvingly the work of Umberto Cassuto, who translated Ugaritic poetry into Hebrew. Ugarit was an ancient city located in modern-day northern Syria, where in the early 20th century, many important ancient texts written in the Ugaritic language were discovered. Ugaritic verse bore an uncanny resemblance to the language of the Tanakh. Yes, Phoenician, Paleo-Hebrew, it's very similar language. It's not the same people. The Canaanites argue that these texts prove that the people of the land of Israel had been much closer socially and culturally to other peoples of the region than they had been to Judaism. Wrong. Judaism was supposed to be separate from the Canaanites, from the pagans. Just because they didn't obey God doesn't mean that they were close. Canaanites in literature, he sought to differentiate between Hebrew literature and Jewish literature written in the Hebrew language. Jewish literature, he claimed, could be and was written in any number of languages. The ideas and writing style that characterized... So basically it's all about like removing Judaism from the Old Testament. That's all it is. Confusing everything about the Jews. And these people are still around. These are the heretics within Judaism undermining everything. So I'm going to try to find a few more interesting passages on this. And then I'm going to get... So the Canaanite mythology. Canaanite verse is often obscure to those unfamiliar with ancient Ugaritic and Canaanite mythology. One of the principal techniques used by the Canaanites to produce Hebrew literature was to adopt words and phrases which the Canaanites regarded as traces of the original unedited Hebraic Tanakh from the Tanakh and use them in a poetic that approximated biblical and Ugaritic verse, especially in their use of repetitive structures and parallelism. Canaanites did not rule out the use of new Hebrew words, but many of them did avoid Mishnaic Hebrew. However, these characteristics represent only the core of the Canaanite movement, not its full breadth. Okay. Canaanites in language also sought for the Romanization of Hebrew in order to further divorce the language from the older Hebrew alphabet. So they're trying to make it so the Jews can't even read their own religious texts. They criticized the Hebrew alphabet in the 60s and 70s for its graphical shortcoming and relationship with Judaism and proposed for official Romanization of the language in order to further free the secular Hebrew Israelis from the hold of religion and integrate them into the larger Levantine region. So there you go. The Canaanites are trying to undermine everything Judaism. These people should not even be legal in that country. This is why we need the Torah. The Torah would protect Israel from these kinds of people. These are the worst kinds of people in Israel. These are heretics, these are witches, these are pagans, these are the synagogue of Satan. And did anything happen to them? Are they still around somewhere? Are they still funding, these secular Jewish groups that run Hollywood, run the porn industry, run everything? Why is the world allegedly run by Jews? Are these actually Jews, or are these the Canaanite Jew heretics? Their proposals for wholesale Romanization met condemnation from various public figures due to the perception that Romanization was a means of assimilation and Levantinization. A. Twerk later compared the Canaanite proposal for Romanization to the more successful reform of the Turkish alphabet as undertaken by Mustafa whatever. Activities: they published a journal, Aleph, featuring the works of several luminaries, including Ratosh, Adia, Horon, Uzi, Ornan, Amos, Kenan, and Benjamin Tammuz. Tammuz is the name of a pagan god. It's the same as Dumuzi. Tammuz is the husband of Isis. It's the husband of Ishtar, Inanna. She was married, so Inanna was married to Dumuzi, and Dumuzi died, and Inanna goes into the underworld to rescue him. This guy has a name of a pagan god as his last name. It was edited by Aaron Amir, and the journal circulated erratically throughout its existence. The journal was named after a young Hebrew's flag designed by Rotah. History of the coalition and the movement was fraught with controversy and opposition. In 1951, leaflets were distributed by self-identified Canaanites in opposition to Zionism during the World Zionist Congress in Jerusalem that year. Later that year, the coalition was formally organized at a conference of ideologues, but the permit to formally register as an NGO was deliberately delayed by the Interior Ministry. The ministry's representative explained that their approval had been delayed because the group did not complete the standard inquiry of the granting of approvals for political societies. The group claimed as many as 500 members at its height, although outside commentators only assessed the number to be around 100. So they arrested one of their members on suspicion of throwing a bomb into the doorstep of David Z. Pincus. Newspaper editorials were lodged against the Canaanite movement and its members. The coalition claimed to have no connection to Kenan or his act, and both Amir and Ratosh filed a libel suit against Isaiah Bernstein on behalf of the coalition, but the suit was rejected for technical reasons. In the 1960s, the movement's members participated in group discussions called Hebrew Thought Clubs and issued a booklet of their discussions as a first claw. Among participants in the discussions were other Canaanites, such as an Israeli Arab who was a member of the Second Knesset. So we see the Israeli Arabs. We got to assume he's a Muslim. 90+% of the Arabs are Muslims. So we see here a Canaanite in Israel that is not a Jew, part of the Canaanite group in the Congress. Here we see some of their depicted art. This is disgusting. These are graven images. If this thing is still standing, somebody should take a hammer and smash this thing, because that is what the Torah calls for. You're not supposed to have graven images in your country. Israel, if you're listening to this and you see an image like this, you see a graven image in your homeland, you smash it. The political influence of the Canaanites was limited, but their influence on literary and intellectual life in Israel was great. Among the avowed Canaanites were the poet Yonatan Ratosh and thinkers. Let's see what else we can find. Something useful. So that depiction of Nimrod is disgusting. Canaanites were considered romantic, anachronistic, and divorced from reality. The influence of Cananism is still evident in some of his political thought. Idea of creating a new people in Palestine different from the Jewish life in the diaspora which preceded it never materialized in purest Canaanite conception, but nevertheless had a lasting effect on the self-understanding of many spheres of Israeli public life. Well, I would say Israel's a secular country. It's not really a Jewish theocracy. And the Canaanites had something to do with that, didn't they? They didn't want they wanted a secular country. They didn't want the Torah to be the law of the land. Canaanite movement, since soon after its inception, has met with heavy criticism. 1945, Nathan Alterman published the poem Summer Quarrel, which took issue with the central tenets of the Canaanite movement. Him and others claimed that so many years in the diaspora cannot be simply expunged. Alterman argued that no one should coerce the Jewish settlement to adopt an identity. Its identity will be determined through its experience in time. No, you should force an identity. You should force the Torah. That is the only identity that works. Any Jew who believes in the religion must read Deuteronomy and live by Deuteronomy, and read the prophets and live by the prophets, and then they should take a close look at the Gospels and come to terms that they and their ancestors rejected Christ, and then Israel will be perfect. He argued that a return to ancient Hebrew traditions is not only feasible but necessary. I agree. Alterman was not the only person to speak out against the Canaanites. Among the important critics of the movement was Baruch Kurzweil, who published The Roots and Quintessence of the Young Hebrews Movement in 1953, analyzed and sharply criticized Canaanite ideas. He argued that the Canaanite ambitions to motivate the variegated ethnography of the region in a single direction was not as easy as the Canaanites believed. He also believed they replaced logic with myths, producing a religious delusion. Since it neglects the historical continuity of its people and introduces obscure concepts into their political vision and its declarations of a Hebrew land on the Euphrates relies on increasingly irrational argumentation, the movement is liable to find itself an escape into the realm of myth. The young Hebrews are not the first to launch themselves into the task of mythical revival. The original contribution is rather stale. For over 100 years, the world has pined for a return to the lap of myth. All right, so in the same article, he argued that if no viable alternative was found, the Canaanite movement might become the leading political ideology in Israel. Well, they have influence. Israel is a secular country. They're not exactly a Torah theocracy, and I believe the Canaanites had something to do with that. Let's get to the next one. So, Semitic Action was a small Israeli political group of the 50s and 60s which sought the creation of a regional federation encompassing Israel and its Arab neighbors. This is an offshoot of the Cananism. The same name is used by a new group formed in 1211 with broadly similar goals, so we can see these people are still around. Created in 1956, the group's key members were Uri Avneri, Natan Yelin Moore, Boaz Evron, and other members including Maxim Gillan, Shalom Cohen, and Amos Keenan. Joel Bainan describes the group as a political expression of the Canaanite movement, which advocated that Hebrew-speaking Israelis cut their ties with the Jewish diaspora and integrate into the Middle East as natives of the region on the basis of an anti-colonialist alliance with the indigenous Arab, Muslim inhabitants. So basically saying these people want to cut ties with Judaism and they want to integrate themselves with the pagan Muslims. In 1958, the group published a platform titled the Hebrew Manifesto. It described the Hebrew nation in Israel as a new identity, but one linked to the Jewish diaspora, and called for moving beyond outmoded Zionist ideas that were now holding back the nation's development. It put forward a program of secularism, complete civic equality between Jews and Arabs, and support for anti-colonial movements, and a relationship with the diaspora based on national interests rather than ethnic, religious, or cultural ties. So, no, this isn't going to work. You need a Torah theocracy. Everybody who lives in the country should follow the Torah, or they should be treated as second-class citizens. And if the Muslims don't want to follow the Torah, then you better ask them, hey, why does your Quran say to follow Moses, and you don't follow what Moses wrote? Jacob Shavit writes that the manifesto emerged from the meeting of three groups: former Canaanites, former Lehi members who had moved to the left, I believe that's a political group, and Avneri and his associates, who Shavit described as neither left nor right. The group published a journal, Etgar, Challenge, edited by Yellen Moore weekly or bi-weekly. It also attempted to run for the Knesset, for the Congress. One of its founders, Yaakov Yeredor, a former Lehi member, represented the Arab nationalist group Al-Ard in three of its trials. So an Arab nationalist group, that sounds to me like Hamas. He represented them in three of their trials. What does that mean? Is he a lawyer? Is he defending them from... I'm going to look into that. I'm not on the internet right now, but I'm definitely going to look into that. Al-Ard. That's very interesting. If I find anything of value, I'm going to add it to the comment section. In December 1960, several members of Semitic Action created the Israeli Committee for a Free Algeria, a group supportive of the FLN in the Algerian War, in opposition to Israel's official policy. The impetus of this decision came when Henry Curiel, who had introduced Avneri to members of the FLN, had suggested to him that an independent Algeria would repay Israel's support by becoming Israel's first friend in the region. So it sounds like to me that these are like communist Jews, doesn't it? 2011 group. Semitic Action was revived in early 2011 as a grassroots peace movement by activists seeking what they call a revolutionary alternative to foreign-backed organizations that only exacerbate local frictions and bring the peoples of our region further from genuine peace. So it sounds like they were propped up during the Arab Spring. 2011 is when the Middle East went into chaos, and this group just happens to pop up again, probably making a lot of inroads with a bunch of Islamic groups like, yeah, we'll help you take over Israel. Totally. So if Israel falls to paganism, if Israel falls to Islam, you better believe that this group had something to do with it, because they've been undermining the Torah since before modern Israel was founded. The New Semitic Action describes itself as an Israeli-based movement seeking to unite the indigenous peoples of the Middle East against the devastating influence of foreign powers in our region and the local conflicts created by the pursuit of their interests. Since its resurrection, the movement has organized meetings between Palestinians and Israeli settlers in the West Bank, initiated campaigns to raise support for an independent Kurdistan, and promoted a unified front of indigenous peoples against foreign political influences in the Middle East. The movement has also been vocal against westernization, globalization, pro-Israeli support from the American Christian right, Islamophobia in Israeli society, capitalism, and the funding of local political organizations by foreign governments. So they don't want Christian support of Israel, and they're against Islamophobia. Do these people not know what the Muslims have been doing to Jews ever since they took power in the Middle East? What Muhammad did to the Banu Qurayza? Like, they must know what they're doing is treason, and they don't seem to care. So this is concerning. These Canaanites are concerning. That's why the Bible was very clear. You shall make no peace with them. You shall utterly wipe them out and destroy them. So the Canaanites, better go to some other country. We need to implement the Torah. That's it. The Torah should be the law of the land in every Christian and Jewish society. If you call yourself a Christian, if you call yourself a Jew, you have an obligation to God to implement the Torah as the foundation of your civilization. Even the Muslims should be doing this too. The Muslims claim they believe in Moses and the prophets. Well, Moses and the prophets followed the Torah. They followed Mosaic law, which God delivered to Moses directly, face to face. So, very interesting stuff. Very, very interesting stuff. Pray for Israel, because these Canaanites, they have power. They're going to be the ones giving little pieces of power to Hamas, because Hamas is at least somewhat propped up by Israeli intelligence. It seems like the Mossad has some connections to the Hamas. So it's interesting. It's interesting that there's a treasonous group inside of Israel that wants to undermine Judaism and work with the Muslims. That's very interesting. Shabbat shalom, people. Pray for Israel. God bless.